Deep in the misty mountains of West Virginia, there's a place that doesn't appear on any map. A place where the sun barely pierces the thick forest, and the locals speak only in whispers, if they speak at all. In these shadowed hills, a family has lived for generations, bound by blood and secrets so twisted they defy belief. And at the heart of this nightmare is Clara, a young woman trapped in a lineage cursed by inbreeding and old rituals. Here, the impossible became reality. She married her own brother, a union the world would condemn, but the family accepted as tradition. Strange disappearances, eerie howls in the night, and houses left to rot with dark histories all point to one truth. This bloodline is not just troubled, it's haunted. Every journal entry, every faded photograph, every local legend hints at horrors that outsiders are too terrified to investigate. Tonight, you will step across the threshold of the mountains into a family's nightmare that the world has forgotten. But you will never forget. Nestled among the dense, mist-laden mountains, the town of Ravens Hollow had long been forgotten by the outside world. Its dirt roads wound through thick forests, and the air was perpetually heavy, with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Few outsiders dared to venture here, and those who did often returned with stories half-formed, eyes wide with unease, unable to put into words what they had witnessed. Generations of families had lived in isolation, passing down not only property, but also secrets steeped in darkness and superstition. The most infamous among them was the Whitmore lineage, a family whose roots traced back to settlers who refused to mingle with the wider community, insisting on keeping their blood pure. Over decades, whispers of strange rituals, missing villagers and children growing up with distorted features became local lore. Parents warned their children to never wander near the old Whitmore estate, a sprawling cluster of timbered houses that seemed stitched together like a grotesque puzzle, windows darkened and doors perpetually creaking. In this place, normality was a fragile illusion. Among them, Clara was born into a world where morality was dictated not by law, but by the twisted rules of bloodline preservation. She knew no other life. The whispers of outsiders, the police notices, the reports of disappearances, they were stories from a distant, unreal world. The Whitmores moved like shadows through their own town, never truly seen yet always present. And yet, even within this insular existence, a sense of unease hung thick. Like the fog that never lifted from the valley floor, it seeped into every corner of their lives. Clara's upbringing was steeped in lessons she didn't question: obedience, secrecy, and above all, loyalty to the family's unbroken and unnatural line. By the time she reached adolescence, the groundwork had been laid for the unthinkable to occur. In this world, love was twisted, tradition was law, and the bonds of family could either protect or destroy. The first unsettling event that would haunt Ravens Hollow began on a late autumn night, when the wind howled through the skeletal branches of the forest, like the cries of unseen spirits. Clara, then just 16, had wandered too close to the outskirts of the Whitmore estate, drawn by a strange curiosity that had been instilled in her from birth. She wasn't supposed to leave the immediate boundaries of her family's property, but the pull of the forbidden, the rumors, the old journals, the stories whispered in hushed tones, was too strong to resist. That night, a neighbor reported hearing muffled screams echoing through the valley, only to find no trace of Clara when they rushed toward the sound. Days later, a faint figure was seen through the grime-streaked windows of the Whitmore mansion. Clara, pale and distant, her eyes hollow, as though she had glimpsed something beyond the natural world. Soon after, small children in the surrounding area began disappearing mysteriously, often during foggy nights when the mountains seemed to swallow the town whole. Rumors swirled that the Whitmores were involved, but fear kept the townspeople silent. Authorities were limited, distant, and ineffective. Investigations stalled in the labyrinth of the family's estate, which had hidden rooms, secret passageways, and locked attics filled with relics of generations past. Clara herself began to change, her demeanor unsettling, her features slightly distorted, a subtle eeriness creeping into her presence. Even her closest relatives hesitated to speak her name, as if invoking it could awaken dormant horrors. It was during this period that whispers first began, that the family didn't just protect their bloodline, they twisted it, merging generations in ways that defied natural law. And yet, despite the fear, the family remained untouchable, shielded by isolation, loyalty, and the surrounding mountains that kept outsiders from seeing the full extent of their deeds. Every incident, every disappearance, was a thread woven into a growing tapestry of dread that would eventually lead to the unthinkable union between Clara and her own brother. The Whitmore family was no ordinary household. Their lineage stretched back centuries, each generation more insular and secretive than the last. The adults moved with an uncanny stillness, their expressions fixed in subtle, unsettling ways, eyes slightly off, lips too thin, faces bearing the imprint of generations born from twisted unions. Children were raised under strict rules, rarely allowed to play outside unsupervised, and never taught about the world beyond the mountains. Clara's own parents, once vibrant individuals, had been molded by this system into hollowed versions of themselves, enforcing obedience with a quiet, almost ritualistic intensity. The estate itself seemed alive, with walls that groaned as if sharing the family's long-held secrets, and corridors that twisted like the veins of a living organism. Visitors were almost unheard of. Strangers were met with cold, calculating eyes and an aura of silent menace. Within these walls, morality had been redefined, warped into something unrecognizable. The family's loyalty to bloodlines eclipsed any concern for conventional ethics. Clara's older brother, Elias, emerged as the next figure in this nightmarish tapestry. From an early age, he had been groomed to continue the family legacy, and his presence radiated both charm and a subtle terror. His gaze could unsettle even the boldest outsider, and the family's older members often exchanged silent glances when he was near, as if aware that his actions could determine the fate of their entire lineage. By the time Clara reached adolescence, the undercurrent of something forbidden and inevitable began to surface. There were hushed conversations in dimly lit rooms, half-glimpsed gestures, and a quiet acceptance among the elders that the natural order did not apply here. It was a place where love and obsession, protection and cruelty, tradition and horror were intertwined so tightly that separating one from the other was impossible. Within this environment, Clara's own feelings became a tangled web of fear, loyalty, and confusion, a perfect storm that would ultimately lead to the horrifying union that outsiders would never comprehend. The Whitmores were a family shaped by isolation, fear, and twisted devotion to their own blood, and anyone who dared to peek behind the curtains risked being consumed by their darkness. One evening, a distant relative visiting the Whitmore estate noticed a door at the far end of the mansion's attic hallway, partially hidden behind heavy drapes and layers of dust. Unlike the other doors, this one bore no markings and appeared untouched for decades. Curiosity gnawed at him, but an unspoken tension hung in the air, as though the house itself was warning him to stay away. Eventually, he gathered the courage to open it, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The smell hit him first, a mix of mildew, old wood, and something far more sinister, metallic, and tangibly rotten. At the bottom, he found a hidden chamber, walls lined with brittle, yellowed photographs of the Whitmore family spanning generations. But these were not ordinary family portraits. Many faces were uneven, malformed, eyes glaring or hollow, and in some, figures were posed in disturbing, unnatural positions. Some photographs depicted what appeared to be rituals, objects arranged in strange patterns, symbols carved into the floor, and eerie dolls that seemed almost lifelike. In the center of the room lay old journals, their pages brittle, ink faded, recounting events of marriages, births, and disappearances that no outsider had ever recorded. Among them, one journal chronicled Clara's own early life, her experiences growing up in a household where love was twisted, obedience was law, and fear was a constant companion. The journals revealed hints of the unthinkable. Marriages within the family to maintain the bloodline, children raised with distorted realities, and secrets buried under layers of denial. For the relative, each page was a step further into the darkness of the Whitmore's world. And as he read, he realized that the true horror was not only in the documented deeds, but in the subtle, pervasive aura of inevitability. Everything had been planned, orchestrated, and accepted across generations. The attic, the journals, and the photographs were more than evidence. They were a window into a lineage that had embraced the grotesque as normal. A family whose legacy of terror and inbreeding was so deeply rooted, it could not be undone. He left the chamber trembling, knowing that the secrets contained within would haunt him forever. The true horror of the Whitmore family was revealed when Clara reached her 18th birthday. The journals and photographs hinted at it. The whispers among the older relatives hinted at it. But nothing could have prepared anyone for the reality. In a ceremony that was private, silent, and chillingly methodical, Clara was married. Not to a stranger, not to an outsider, but to her own brother, Elias. The union was framed as a continuation of the family bloodline, a grotesque tradition passed down through generations. The moment was captured only in faded photographs and the hushed memories of those present, yet it conveyed everything. Clara's hollow eyes, Elias's unsettling, uneven stare, and the family's eerie satisfaction. The town itself seemed to recoil. Neighbors spoke in terrified whispers of the marriage, yet no one dared intervene. It was a union that shattered every moral law, yet for the Whitmores, it was ordinary, inevitable, and even celebrated. But the twist did not end there. Investigations years later, police reports, journals recovered from hidden rooms, revealed that Clara's mother had herself married within the family decades earlier, continuing a cycle of inbreeding that had left the bloodline twisted in ways that were visible in the children's features. Doctors, when consulted later, noted genetic deformities that were consistent with long-term close relative marriages. And yet, the family did not waver. They carried on their lives in a house that seemed more like a mausoleum than a home, with new generations raised in the same cruel, secretive traditions. By the time Clara and Elias became adults, the patterns were unmistakable. Disappearances, strange rituals, and marriages designed solely to preserve blood purity. Outsiders often assumed these horrors were exaggerations, legends of a cursed mountain family. But evidence, photographs, and testimonies painted a different reality. A living nightmare, meticulously orchestrated over decades. The twist was not just that Clara married her brother. The twist was that their family, generation after generation, had planned accepted, and normalized these horrors, embedding them so deeply into their lineage that anyone born into it was destined to participate. What outsiders saw as monstrous was, to the Whitmores, survival, legacy, and law. The mountains concealed this dark secret for years, and even now, the echoes of their deeds linger like a shadow that refuses to dissipate. As Clara grew older, the oppressive weight of the Whitmore legacy pressed harder against her mind. The mansion that had once felt like home now seemed like a labyrinth of shadows, each hallway whispering reminders of the bloodline she could never escape. Though the family tried to present their twisted traditions as duty and honor, Clara's growing awareness of the outside world made her question the morality that had been drilled into her from birth. One stormy night, she resolved to leave, to step beyond the mountains and into a life she could claim for herself. The winds howled like distant wails as she crept past the sleeping forms of her relatives, careful not to awaken suspicion. But the Whitmores were always watchful. Elias, whose presence had once been a silent threat, now became an active barrier, moving silently through corridors with unnerving precision. As Clara neared the estate gates, the fog thickened and shadows seemed to twist around her like living fingers. Suddenly, a hand gripped her shoulder. Elias, his eyes dark with a mixture of obsession and familial loyalty, whispering that leaving was not an option. Panic surged as she struggled, but the family's reach was longer than she imagined. Hidden passages, secret doors, and familiar corridors gave them an almost supernatural ability to intercept anyone who dared to defy them. In that moment, Clara realized that escape wasn't just about leaving the estate. It was about outsmarting generations of planning, rituals, and cunning that had ensured the family's secrets remained hidden. Her heart pounded as she darted into a forgotten wing of the house, walls lined with cobwebs and broken relics, her breath ragged. Every step was a gamble, every shadow a potential trap. Outside, the storm raged, masking sounds and offering brief hope. Inside, the Whitmores moved as one, orchestrating a silent pursuit that Inbred, patience, knowledge, and the quiet terror of someone who knows every inch of your life. In those moments, Clara's survival depended not just on speed or strength, but on her ability to navigate the twisted labyrinth of a family that had made horror their heritage, and whose shadows would chase her forever if she faltered. Clara's attempt at freedom was only the beginning of a lifetime haunted by the Whitmore legacy. Though she eventually escaped the mountains, the shadows of her family never truly left her. Every step into the outside world carried the weight of generations steeped in secrecy, inbreeding, and unthinkable rituals. She tried to start anew, blending into towns where no one knew her name, but the memories were relentless. The hollow eyes of her brother, the stiff expressions of elders, the whispers of rituals performed in darkness. Investigators who later pieced together the history of the Whitmore bloodline were met with fragmented journals, distorted photographs, and eyewitness accounts that seemed almost too monstrous to believe. Yet, evidence confirmed the horror. Multiple generations had engaged in incestuous unions. Children were raised with distorted features, and the family had maintained an iron grip over their town for decades. Even today, the mansion in the mountains stands as a grim sentinel, decaying yet defiant, holding within its walls the echoes of a family that never truly left its own nightmare. Clara's story became both a warning and a mystery, a testament to how isolation, secrecy, and blind devotion to tradition can warp morality into something unrecognizable. True horror, it seemed, wasn't just the deeds themselves, but the normalization of those deeds across generations, leaving outsiders to wonder whether the Whitmores were an anomaly or a reflection of what happens when darkness is allowed to fester unchecked. The mountains remain, silent and shrouded in fog, concealing secrets that no one dares fully uncover. And somewhere in the world, Clara carries the legacy with her, a reminder that some families are cursed, not by choice, but by blood, and that the echoes of horror can reach far beyond the mountains where they began. For those who dare to invest. Wassegate, the Whitmore's tale, is a chilling lesson. The most terrifying monsters are often not strangers lurking in the night, but those born into the shadow of a family's darkest truths.